Hello everyone and welcome back. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different, something a little bit weird. We're going to be kind of ranking what the decks I personally think are very good for the ladder as of right now, especially in best of one. It's not something I've done before, at least whenever it comes to just ranking decks straight up, but I did have a video that was supposed to come out. I was filming it, my power flickered, I lost like an hour of recording, which is perfectly fine, but I just don't have the time right now to like make that back up. Kind of the downside of having a full-time job. But yeah, so I just kind of thought maybe we'd just do a little tier list here, kind of see what we think really ranks and what sits at the top, especially when it comes down to playing best of one, at least from my personal experience, what I think is the best and what isn't. And we could just go right through, but I think one of our obvious kind of topic here and where we want to start is the Corey Steel Cutter, and I would go ahead and we're going to say that this is the Is-It variation of Corey Steel Cutter. Obviously, it goes in a lot of different decks, but we have Mono Red and Gruul kind of in another card on here. And Corey Steel Cutter is one of those few cards that have entirely taken over the game and made it very good in both best of one and best of three. So I think of all decks, especially on the ladder at any given time, this just has to be S tier, right? It's the most represented deck at the Pro Tour, or not the Pro Tour, the event overseas, and then there's a Star City Games event, which I believe is also the top, and it's not necessarily that close, and it just continues to dominate every time I see it. And in any tournament, you're looking at anywhere between 3 to 5 in your top 8, and it's so good. Very popular, very fun deck to play, so definitely kind of, if you have that deck archetype, it can definitely get you anywhere, especially Mythic, and it's not particularly that close. But let's dive into maybe a more controversial one here, and that is going to be Domain. Domain is one of those weird ones that I think is really good in the best of three space at beating up a lot of the mid-range decks or even like control decks, because Up to Beanstalk is obviously so hard. And I do think Pixie typically struggles with Domain because they get to go to the Bailoffs and stuff. But in best of one, I think the aggro is way too much. And I think this card, this deck is typically going to reside in the lower tier decks. I think this has to be, for best of one specifically, I feel like it has to be in C or B. I don't really know if there's a lot of decks that are super bad. Like, I don't even think the doesn't even exist. I don't think any deck will end up in here unless we're trying to be really picky and being like there can only be 2 S tier decks and 3 A tier, which I kind of like that. So maybe we'll be like kind of forced to push some down and some around. But we can go right into probably what is arguably one of the other better decks, at least in best of one, but it does have a lot of problems. For example, you need to find a lot of things. Main board cards can just hurt you, like Rest in Peace, for example. And that's going to be Omniscience Combo. One of the things about it is it does have very free wins. And the fact that if you're playing like a slower deck, eventually they can win. I had a game recently where I had 3 removal spells and my opponent had 3 confounding riddles. It's at the beginning of the video of one of my Just Guy control ones. I think it's not the latest one, but the one before, where I tried to remove it 3 separate times and still lost. I think this has to sit in A tier. I don't know if it's S because I feel like it gets folded by a lot of the aggro decks if they don't immediately have it. Obviously, if Omniscience does its thing in the first couple of turns, you're going to lose the game, right? So it is what it is, but at the same time, if they stall 1 turn, typically aggro can kind of get there, and I don't know if it's necessarily that close. But with that said, we're going to kind of fold around. It's a little bit weird. I don't know exactly how to approach it. Maybe I do approach with Just Guy control now and kind of go about that. So Shiko here, going to obviously be our Just Guy card. Where would I like to put this? So one of the things I've enjoyed about this deck is that I feel like against the best deck in the meta, being Corey Steel Is-It prowess, I've had very good success. I think my rate against it right now is like 7-1, 8-1, or something like that, specifically because you get to play Temporary Lockdown. Lightning Helix is really good. You can play in a Braid and you don't have to play too many because you can play Shiko, get it back, and kind of do it again. So it's very good against the best deck, but it also struggles against Omniscience, because if you don't have the counterspell or they outgrow your counterspell, like all your burn does nothing, you have to somehow close out the game. Domain's a little bit weird, and it's obviously a bit of a struggle there. So I would put it in A, but if we're going to restriction of like 2 to 3 up here, 2 to 3 here, just to kind of fold it out a bit. I think it has to kind of go at the front of B tier. I do think an experienced pilot with some of these decks does kind of change, but if you're talking overall, like, still, if you're including everybody, right, I think in the best hands, you could argue that it's A, maybe even in front of Abuelo, but like right now, this is a best of one tier list once again. So it's a little bit different, obviously, and I think Shigo kind of resides at the front of B. And here we are with another deck in mono red aggro. Those stupid little mice, man. They're so good, and it's so hard to beat. And when it comes to best of one tier ladder, I don't even think I have to spend that long. It's S tier. It's so good. I honestly think Monster Trades is one of the biggest problems we have in our game right now because of how effective that card is whenever they target the Heartfire hero, and then it just attacks with double strike as a 2/2 and then as a 3/3. And you go to interact with it, and a Monstrous Rage it. Now it's a 6/3 or a 6/4 with double striking trample, and it just becomes this impossible creature to remove. And even if you do remove it at some point, you still take damage for it unless it's exiled. So mono red, obviously, I think has to go to the top. And arguably, you could definitely kind of interchange these two. That's one of the things about this kind of S tier is I think is it oftentimes can struggle with mono red to an extent. It kind of depends who's on the play in this matchup a lot. And if you're playing Torch to the Towers in the main in that kind of is it deck, you can get mono red often. But now we are into some of the different decks that are awesome but also weird. And we're going to start off with Esper Pixie. Where I think Esper Pixie is good is I definitely think it's A. I don't know if we really have to spend too much time on that. Pixie can either do the Pixie thing where it's Hopeless Nightmare, pick it up, play it again, pick it up, play it again, and then you just feel like you can never win. But you can also kind of do the thing where if you are playing a slower deck, for example, or a deck that just has like high-end valuable cards, for example, like Stock Up is very hard for them to beat. It's also hard for them to beat a card like Beanstalk. And having that kind of a vulnerable of a situation, especially in best of one, without being able to have access to that sideboard, I do think it kind of resides in A, and it doesn't quite have the punch that the Omniscience deck is. And I also think it is very weird for them to match up against the Omniscience deck, because right now with a couple of decks in the meta, sometimes playing a Hopeless Nightmare will actually make you lose the game in comparison to the other way around. So a little bit weird, but with that, I'll put it in A. And we're kind of on to our last 6. I don't think I need to talk about this one too much. I'll just get it out of the way. This is the Gruul variation. I don't know exactly what we would call this. So I'm going to call this Gruul one not just mono red with Questing Druid. I'm going to call this one with like Innkeeper's, not Innkeeper's, no, it is Innkeeper's Talent, the one that puts counters and stuff on it. And I think we're probably going to have to slide this into our first C tier. It is so good, but in comparison to how good the other ones are, I think this one is a lot less desired. For example, if this is just a red version and we're just playing Questing Druid, I think obviously we're up here just because it's mono red without, like, we're playing one green card. But if we're truly saying it's green and we're playing like maybe Snakeskin Veil or we're playing some of those other oddball cards, I feel like Pixie has a hard time. I feel like every time you play an Innkeeper's Talent against Domain, you buy them a turn. I don't think you can keep up with the Innkeeper. The mono red deck, I think, crushes it. I think Jeskai beats it. So it's one of those things where I think any of these decks up here can beat it. And it's one of the few decks that's an aggro deck that allows our kind of Omniscience deck time enough to win. So it's a bit weird there. So it's kind of odd. It's a little bit awkward, but yeah. So with that said, we'll move on. And again, I'm trying to make sure that I don't pile everything at the top, even though this meta is very good. All these decks overall are like tier 1. It's just how good are your tier 1 decks. And then that leads into Golgari. And I'm going to do it. Some people might hate it. It's the D tier deck. It is so hard to keep up with the value that is currently being made in today's game, and a deck that really relies on one for oneing struggles to beat any deck with Quarry Steel up to Beanstalk. Like if it's up against any control matchup, it struggles. If it's up against Domain, I think it struggles. Pixie can get them because their creatures have flying and their lower to the ground creatures aren't necessarily able to interact. Best card they have is like the Deep Cavern Bat for that, but obviously you're never blocking with that. So Golgari finding our D tier kind of it's probably going to be the only one in D tier of these, but it is a solid best of 3 overall. But right now, I think even a best of 3, it would rank the lowest amongst all the decks. Now, we have some oddball ones, and it might be just from my personal experience. The Oculus deck, I swear, either feels like the best deck in the world, or you feel like you're playing the worst deck in the game. It's so awkward because if your opponent hopeless nightmares you and you put an eye in your graveyard and then you immediately helping hand it back out, it almost feels like you can never lose that match ever. And them helping you is great. But the amount of times that I've played this list and never found an eye and had to awkwardly try to grind out of the game. If I was against Pixie, I never felt like I could get there. If I was against Mono Red, I felt too slow. If I was against like a control deck, they just countered my reanimate spell and I couldn't really do much about it. It just relies on too many cards, kind of like Omniscience, but it feels maybe a bit worse because whenever their reanimate spell resolves, they win instantly. Ours, we still have to kind of get there, and it just feels like it's a little bit on the low end. So I'm going to put it at the end of B. Actually, I'll put it in front of Domain. I do think it's better than Domain. And now that I think about it, I think this is where I'm moving Domain down. I think Domain has to come down. I think Domain, I don't see it enough. This is weird. I'm having my first pivot. I think Domain has to come down, and I would honestly put it behind the Gruul aggro, but maybe I'm wrong there. It's just like, I'm having such disrespect for this because of how good these are. And maybe this is kind of the hot take of the video, you know, the one that everybody disagrees with. But it's just kind of how I feel right now. And obviously my opinion can change. But most of the time, if I see my aggro opponent playing green, I feel way more confident to win than if they're just mono red or this. But I know we're talking about Oculus. I think Oculus slots in the B, and we'll call from there. So with that said, we have kind of some more of the oddball ones down here. This is going to be our blue-black Pixie deck. And then this is the Dimir kind of mid-range deck, which is oftentimes good. And then this is blue-white control, which I think will struggle from the same thing as kind of the Shiko Jeskai control deck did, in the fact that, like, slower matchups feels like you can't lose. The fast matchups, sometimes you can't get out in time, but the control deck is different based on the pilot, and that matters a ton. If a pro player picks up blue-white and starts playing it on the ladder, full confident they can do it. But if any random person picks up blue-white, I feel like they struggle a bit more. And I think it's honestly harder to play overall than the Jeskai deck, so I'm going to slot it in behind here at the very end. And I think kind of the Jace Mill strategy is a bit awkward, and I think it's a little bit too hard to do. So it's going to slot in at the end of B. And then this is where the Dimir deck kind of slots in. This is the Kaido mid-range deck. This deck feels so strong when it gets going, but if it doesn't get going, it feels like they do nothing ever. And whenever they just hard cast a Kaito, you feel like you just can't lose the game. But same with the mid-range deck. So it's a bit weird because both of these decks are really, 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 really reliant on if Kaito resolves. But the Pixie deck has a little bit more play in my mind overall. So I think we're going to look at putting the Pixie deck. It's weird because I don't want to move. I don't want to put any of these decks lower. I don't really want to put them any higher. I think we have to move control blue-white anyway. And we're going to put it here. And then I'm going to move blue-black mid-range, I think, at the front of this pile. And then we're going to move blue-black kind of here. I don't know what you want to call it. Because it doesn't have Pixie, but like the blue-black version of Esper Pixie kind of right here. So I think that's the list. I think that's where I'm going to end up at. Obviously, you can see an ad at the bottom. They're trying to get me, dude. I can roll up. But yeah, so with that, I think that's where we end on this. And this is kind of my tier list. I don't know if anybody has something else to say. Maybe you disagree with my list. That's fully understandable. We all obviously don't think the same, and we obviously all don't play the same matchups all the time. If you play something else than I do, or maybe you're in a different rank than I am, the meta is obviously going to be different at any stage of the game. But this is where I feel most of all and the most confident in. For example, like if I see a Corey Steel Cutter, all right, we're playing the best deck in the meta. And I think that's undoubtable along with Mono Red. I feel like they're the scariest. I feel like Omniscience is scary, but oftentimes if they miss, it's whatever. Esper Pixie is also equally as scary, and it's kind of whatever. But if I play against Jeskai and I have any of those top decks, I feel confident. Same with the Oculus and the blue-black deck. And B and C are very close, but it's more or less like I don't want to put them all in the same tier. I think Golgari right now, best of one, might be the only D tier deck. Even if you personally have had success with Golgari, I barely see it on the ladder, and every time I do, it is Unholy Annex or bust, it seems like, because they always run out of cards, and then they always get kind of ran over because their 1-for-1 removal is not great when Corey Steel or other things are making creatures for free. And if you're playing a control deck, they never have anything to target. So what decks did we miss? Is there anything else that you would like to see ranked on the ladder? Or is there any changes you would personally like to see to this tier list? Let me know below and we can have kind of a civil discussion. You don't have to call me an idiot, but feel free to, I guess, kind of. But be nice about it a little, you know? With that said, it's going to do it for me today. Sorry again for no actual video, but I do think this is good. And I'm going to try to hopefully have all the deck lists that I'm specifically kind of preferring or referring to on kind of, you know, the screen so we can kind of get an evaluation of the exact deck we're talking about whenever we're talking about each one of these individually. With that said, I hope you all enjoy, and I'll catch you in the next one. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.